Jeff, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I read it last night. I want to talk a little bit more about graphic novels a little bit later. But first, I know you said that each book really marks the place you were in when you made it. And I know that's not geographically, but as a person. Roughneck is a book about this former NHL player. He's drinking and he's fighting and he's dealing with his family. He's in trouble with the law. I'm interested, given that you say these books reflect where you are. Where were you when you wrote Roughneck?
Yeah, it was an interesting time for me. I think I actually started Roughneck quite a while ago. It's been done for over a year, but we held on to it because Secret Path came out first and we didn't want to put them out at the same time. So I think I started working on the book probably like 2012, 2013. Yeah, I mean, I was going through some stuff myself. I'm kind of dealing with some things in my life I was trying to change.
Yeah.
Much like Derek, the character in the book. But, aside from that, there's a whole heap of fiction put on it as well. He's his own character in his own world, and you kind of create metaphors for things you're dealing with.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but what about this particular story? Why did you want to tell this particular story?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm trying to think back. At the time, I had done Essex County. Well, now it's been about 10 or 12 years since I did that book. But
it doesn't seem that long ago.
I know, it's crazy. And after that, especially when I go to the States, everyone sees it as sort of this epitome of Canadian fiction or something, And I that kind of lingered, that it is Canadian fiction, Essex County, but it's kind of an idealized I mean, I love the book. I'm very proud of Essex County, and I wouldn't do anything differently. But now I feel like my awareness of the country of Canada and what Canada is so much broader than it was back then. Instead of this sort of idealized, world of hockey and small towns.
What changed there?
I think I just started opening my mind a bit more to, what other cultures in our, First Nations and Indigenous people in Canada were going through, and how that had been something that wasn't even on my radar in the past, and it sort of suddenly came on my radar. I don't know how that started, but it just became something I became very concerned with and troubled by, and I certainly reading different authors like Richard Rogamisan, Joseph Boyden, and other people, reading their stuff sort of started me down the path of becoming more aware of what was going on in the North and in the First Nation communities. And I felt like if I was going to do another Canadian story, it would be good to not just touch on the idealized Canada, but also the other parts of Canada that maybe I didn't know enough about.
I want to talk a little bit about those influences a little bit later. But first, I was thinking while I was reading this that the other day we had Jay Baruchel into the studio. Mm-hmm. Jay was in promoting Goon 2, which is, of course, a very different take on the hockey goon, on the hockey enforcer. Yeah. Derek, the character in Roughneck, is a fighter. He was a fighter in hockey. And I know you've touched upon that story, that kind of story in your work before. Just as an author, just as a creative person, what is it about the hockey enforcer that we find so interesting?
Yeah, well, going back to the first question, I think one thing I kind of just forgot until you said that was that was the summer. The summer I started working on this book was that summer. I think 4 ex-enforcers either committed suicide or died that summer. It was the summer Wade Belak committed suicide, and Bugner, I think, as well. Mm-hmm. And there were a couple. So that was a story that those 4 stories of those men really hit me, and I really started thinking about what that life of violence does to a guy. These are young men who grow up playing hockey, and they quickly find their path in the game is to be the tough guy, to fight, to do that every night, and if they want to stay in the game, and be vital. And so basically, it is a life of violence, and then when the game kind of leaves them behind, they're sort of still left with that violence inside them, but nowhere to put it. And that became a fascinating idea to me, to creating a character.
And often they're not remembered in the same way.
No,
I mean, if you look at the non-hockey fan list of hockey players who they know, I mean, you think of Mario Lemieux, you think of Wayne Gretzky, you think of Chris Chelios. Yeah. You don't hear names like Bugner. You don't hear names like Marty McSorley. No. You don't hear, it's... Or
if you do, it's for some infamous on-ice thing like Marty McSorley that happened that, isn't a great memory, And there are the rare occasion, there's people like Ty Domi who kind of created a sense of celebrity around himself, who transcended being the tough guy, But for most of the part, these guys are soldiers who just... They do what they need to do, and for their teammates, and then the game leaves them behind, and they're forgotten.
And damaged.
And damaged physically, mentally, emotionally. And that became a fascinating and really intriguing entry point into a character study for me with Derek.
Also, I was so curious about Derek's childhood, because I know that his childhood is a key part of the man that he becomes. I don't want to give away too much, but you see sort of the familial reasons that he was encouraged to be an enforcer, to fight rather than to skate. And, you know, the theme of what happens to us as children and how it impacts us when we grow up is a huge part of Roughneck. And some of the most, I don't want to give away too much again. I'm trying not to do any spoilers here, but it's hard because some of the most impactful moments are moments where your characters are standing on the road and are looking at themselves as children. And I'm realizing that looking at children is something that is synonymous with a lot of your books, a lot of your work. Why is childhood something you want to explore?
I feel like the things you experience, I mean, I'm not saying anything earth-shattering here, but the things you experience as a kid impact you. Everything you feel, everything so much deeper as a kid. You're not jaded by the world yet, so everything, the good and the bad, is so exciting or so terrible depending on what you're experiencing. And those feelings are so intense compared to what we feel as adults. You know, I feel like things get dulled down as we get older, and I find that I love writing that from that point of view of a child who just feels everything so intensely and everything's so important to them.
But also the loss of innocence seems to be something.
Yeah,
that
it's
you
good and
explore
bad,
a lot.
right? Yeah, I mean that's part of childhood is leaving childhood behind, and that's so heartbreaking to me. You know, I wish, especially as a father now myself, I have a 8-year-old son, and watching him grow and slowly go from being a baby to a toddler to now to a kid, and you see him leaving parts of that behind, and that can be heartbreaking. You know, you just want him to stay that one age forever. You know, you want him to be innocent. You want him to be so excited about everything and so innocent, and I find that so sad.
And you see how the world turns us into adults, whether we want to do it or not. I heard a great interview with a great band called Dawes. They're a band from California. And the lead singer said he wrote this song because his little brother was 6 or 7 years old, and he said, and this is the radio, he said the F word for the first time. And he said, oh man, like something was left behind the first time you curse like that.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, if you look at someone like Derek and his sister in the book, they both grew up with very troubled childhoods, and they both looked for a way out, and unfortunately they both took avenues that weren't healthy, you know, and now it's a time as adults where they can kind of get some perspective and hopefully sort of find a new way of living, you know. That was the other sort of theme I was interested in.
It's fascinating. If you're just tuning in, by the way, I'm speaking with novelist Jeff Lemire. He has a new book out called Roughneck. And I want to talk a little bit about A Secret Path and Roughneck. You mentioned that you were writing Roughneck when Gord Downey approached you to write Secret Path. You kind of put Roughneck to the side and concentrated on Secret Path. Congratulations, by the way, on the Juno Awards.
Oh, thanks.
For that project.
I only got into comics to win music awards, so
well,
it really worked out for me.
But you said that Secret Path and Roughneck are kind of linked, that they complement
really
one
are.
another. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, I was creating them at the same time, so they can't help but be linked aesthetically, visually, especially. They look almost the same, you know. I was about halfway, I think exactly halfway through Roughneck when I met with Gord and his brother Mike for the first time at my studio, and they've kind of laid out their idea for doing the Secret Path and told me about Chaney Wenjack and they asked what I was working on at the moment, and I kind of explained about Roughneck, and we just, you know, the thematic parallels and things were, they both kind of smiled to themselves, knowing I was already working on a book about the North and about First Nations, and then they were presenting this Secret Path to me. It all seemed fated that we work on it together at that time.
Was it hard to put it away? Was it hard to stop this project to start something else?
No, it's not, because writing comics is pretty grueling, you know, day in, day out, page after page. It's pretty tedious, you know. So after, you know, 100 and something pages of drawing it every day, it was kind of nice to have an excuse to take a break.
Right, because it's not like traditional writing, and I know I'm going to sound like, you know, I don't really know that much about it, but I guess when you write a traditional novel, you're sitting down with a word processor in front of you, and you're typing. This is something so different.
Yeah, it's very, drawing a page of comics it's a lot of hard work, and doing it every day, it's a grind, you know. And you kind of have to keep your eye on the bigger picture and the bigger story you're telling, because you can get really caught up in the details of what a particular face looks like that day, and you're not drawing it properly and stuff, and you can get too much tunnel vision on like the details, and you know. So it's nice to step back, and I think doing Secret Path gave me a whole new perspective.
What do you mean?
it was interesting. I've only ever written linear, I guess narrative, where I write a script for myself and I'm drawing dialogue. I'm drawing and I'm dialoguing it and following a plot, And then Gord came and all of a sudden I was adapting music, and music is so. It's like poetry. It's completely different. It's not linear. It's not literal. It's so metaphorical, his lyrics and stuff. And so it was suddenly a completely different way of me processing how to illustrate and how to visualize things that were less specific, less linear, more poetic. And it really opened up a lot of creative visual avenues for me that I then brought back into Roughneck, going back to it.
It was some of the more interesting conversations that happened around Secret Path, were you and Gord talking about how in many ways this wasn't your story to tell, and you had to be very cautious in the way that you told it. Roughneck, again, deals with Indigenous issues. I should say, if you're listening to this on the radio and not watching it, you're not an Indigenous person.
No.
You're a white person from Southern Ontario.
Yeah.
What do you see as your role in speaking about Indigenous issues in your work?
I don't know that I have a role, and I don't even know if I should have done the books, to be honest with you.
Do you ever feel that way?
I always feel that way. Yeah, it's not my story to tell. None of these stories are. And
so what keeps you doing it?
Because you get it in your head. You fall in love with the story, and you just have to do it for good, for better or for worse. It's not going to let you go. This character of Derek and his sister come to life inside me, and just like Channy, the fictional version of Channy did. And once they're in there, you just got to get it out. So
what a strange feeling that must be to work so hard on something and then release it and then go, I don't really know if I should be putting this out.
Well, yeah, it is strange, and it's something new for me because I really don't feel like these are my stories to tell. But at the same time, you look at the impact Secret Path has had, and the fact that it's going to be in, I think, every school in Ontario next year, and you'll have all these children learning about residential schools who had never heard of them before. Gord and I grew up not learning about them in school at all, which is why we wanted to do it in the first place. And then you look at that, and I think, well, it was worth it. Maybe it's not my story to tell, but it's done some good, and also the fact that Channy's family, the Wenjack sisters, embraced us and endorsed the project and supported everything we did. It makes me feel like it's okay that we did it. If his family's okay with it, then I'm okay with it.
I can only imagine there must be so many conflicts, and this is such a beautiful book. But I can't help but notice, I was looking in the back page of the book, and I see under the thank yous, I see Joseph Boyden there, and you mentioned reading Richard Wagamese and reading Joseph Boyden as encouraging you to tell stories from the north of this country and to tell some Indigenous stories. But obviously, with the questions surrounding Joseph Boyden's heritage in the past year or so, I'm wondering if that made you change your mentality around these things.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I don't know how much we want to get into Joseph's situation.
As much as you want to.
I'll be honest, I don't know Joseph that well.
Yeah.
I know Gord much better than I know Joseph. And I met Joseph a few times, and I really liked his writing. I don't know enough about the details of his heritage.
I'm more interested. I'm more interested about you. I mean, you get this inspiration from.
Well,
this
there's
person.
a big difference between the way Gord and I presented our work and the way Joseph presents his work. Joseph presents himself as someone who's part of the community and a spokesman for the community, I think. And I don't think Gord and I have ever said that we are, or so there's a big difference, I think, there. But I think that is the difference.
But I can only imagine. I mean, I don't want to harp on it, but I can only imagine that, after finding influence from someone and then seeing questions around that heritage, it must change you a little bit. It must mess with you a little bit.
Yeah, I think it changed my perspective on his work for sure. Yeah.
What is it about? What is it though about these stories? What is it about in First Nations culture, Indigenous culture, and heritage that you want to bring to people's attention?
Well, I think it's something that it's not something that happened in the past. It's something that's happening right now
as we speak. Yeah.
There are people suffering in our country, and we're not doing anything about it. So if I can do anything through art to raise awareness to that, I think that's a good thing. I think it's that simple. I mean,
I think that you looking at this book last night and just kind of realizing that, I'll tell you this, the Secret Path was the first graphic novel I ever bought. I'll be honest with you, it's a really, really new genre for me.
Okay.
I apologize.
That's okay. But I do not represent all graphic novels.
but as a graphic novelist and as a very acclaimed one, and as someone,
I love hearing that. That's my favorite things to hear. My favorite thing about my career is that I don't just have fanboys reading my stuff, and God bless them because they help, provide my living.
Yeah, they help put the gas in the car.
And I love them, and I'm one of them. But I love them when I do signings and shows. I have this mixture of, people reading my X-Men comics coming up with big stacks of that to be signed. And then people who have literally never read a comic book before coming up and getting this thing signed. And I love that somehow my work has found this bridge between those two things, and it's not very common.
But to that, and I'm hoping I can ask you a very kind of basic question for someone like you, but a very new question for someone like me. And I think if you're listening to this right now, you may have not read a graphic novel before Secret Path, or maybe not at all. What can graphic novels do to address very, very complex issues like the ones you explore in both Secret Path and now in Roughneck?
Well, it's a big question. I think they're just trying to strip that down to a few things. First of all, I think graphic novels, obviously these aren't, the stuff I do isn't always for kids, but one real benefit of graphic novels is it's a great way to get kids reading who may not read normally. And that's certainly not the only attribute of the medium that I think we should focus on, but it is a great gateway for kids, and a great way to introduce kids to difficult subjects. And then more, on a creative, artistic side, the medium, to me, is limitless. It combines the best aspects of literature and visual art into something completely different and new, and it's a completely different language that I think it's limitless what you can do with it. And you can read a novel, and like I do, and I love reading fiction. But if you look at a good graphic novel, you're not just looking at words on a page; you're looking at those drawings come right from somebody's hand. It's like seeing somebody's handwriting and somebody's fingerprint right on the page, telling you that story in a way that only that person can do it with their particular drawing style. And that was what drew me to comics so much in the first place, was seeing all these different artists and different ways they draw and in these personal styles. And I just find it so compelling and fascinating to see it's just so visceral and feels more tangible than reading prose to me.
I think that with this, you have a very, very big publisher behind you now for this book, and I can only imagine that the pressure must be on, or it must be, there's a lot more hands in your pocket than maybe there used to be, and this could be a time where someone at your stature, and your stature is growing, could be tempted to do a story about a more American-based town. But from what I can tell about you, you still want to tell Canadian stories, and why is that so important to you?
Yeah, I think there was some disappointment on Simon & Schuster US when I first pitched this. I think they wanted something that wasn't so specifically Canadian. But I got to be true to what I'm interested in at the moment.
Why is that so interesting to you?
Well, this is where I live. This is this is the country I live in. These are the stories I'm interested in. And you always draw from your own life in some way. So, I love telling stories set in Canada and show different sides of the country, and I kind of feel a little bit of a responsibility as a Canadian cartoonist to do that, because there aren't a lot of us, who are in the position where we can tell any story we want to tell, and I love Canada, good and bad, and it's constantly a source of inspiration for me.
Well, Jeff Lemire, I've read 2 graphic novels, and they've both been yours. So thank you.
You should stop there. It doesn't get any better.
You know what? I'll give it up there. It's all over now. Jeff Lemire, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Okay, thanks.